Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 269. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something with us. Terri, what do you have?
Well, Daisy, I went back to one of our tried and true podcasts that we both love, Kwik Brain with Jim Kwik, because I needed something that was kind of quick as I was preparing.
Always reliable.
That's right. But one of the reasons I chose this is because you and I have talked a lot about how we both listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I know in the past, we both did a little work with Jim Kwik's programs about speed reading and things. And I know that both you and I have done episodes specific to memory and got to even do some tests with each other.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I still use those actually.
I would have to refresh my memory about that now. But so this episode is called How to Memorize Information When You Can't Write It Down.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Kwik used the example that you and I think could relate to the most is that if you're listening to audiobooks while you're doing something, today I was listening while I was riding my bike, if you're driving or you're cleaning your house or you're doing something, you can't write down notes, you can't underline it like you might in an actual book.
Yeah, you can't even use my handy tip. If I've got my phone with me, I do the screenshot trick, but you can't really do that one either.
No, I definitely should not do that one while riding my bike or driving.
No.
Which is two of the times when I love to listen to audiobooks. So I thought, well, this is great because some of the audiobook listening I do is just for fun, but a lot of it is for content and things that I want to remember. And so I thought, oh, this will be helpful for me because I need some strategies to help so that I remember that content. So the first one, the number one tip that he gave is repetition. And I know you and I have talked a lot about repetition in various ways before. But he said, this one is probably obvious. Listen to the key section more than once. So if you listen to something and think, oh, that's really meaningful, go back and listen to it. Repeat it. You might even do it a few times. And he quoted Tony Robbins saying that repetition is the mother of skill. And so, we have to keep hearing something. We have to keep having exposure to it. Repeating things and then reviewing it can be really important because it reinforces our memory by kind of helping to solidify that neural pathway that's associated with this information. So repetition is really important. The number 2 tip he gave then was verbal summarization. So what does that mean? After you listen to an important section or a chapter, you want to say it out loud, reiterate what you've just learned, summarize it. And so he gave an example like this might be a great time to explain it to someone else, share it with someone, call someone after that chapter, but have it get, again, kind of codified into your brain by repeating it in your own summary. And then one of the things he talks about, and this is also kind of reinforced in something that I learned actually in undergrad, that one of the best ways to really know something is to teach it. So if you read that chapter and there's something really valuable in it, teach it to someone because it makes us process the information a little differently when we think of how we're going to share it with someone. It really reinforces what we know. So teaching information is really an extremely powerful method to really deepen your own understanding and holding on to that information. So actually, number 3 is to teach it, prepare the information, give an explanation. Really, when you teach something, you learn it twice. So that's his 3rd tip. The next one that he recommends come from a course that he has offered. That's a 30-day course called Kwik Recall. And in this course, there's all kinds of memory devices that we can use, like mnemonic devices, and some of those that you and I have shared in previous podcast episodes. So really using something to create some mental associations with the knowledge that you're picking up from what you're listening to. It could be as simple as acronyms that help you to remember specific details. Like if there's a list of 4 things, you use an acronym that starts with those 4 letters.
Yeah, he's good at coming up with those, isn't he?
Or as one of the strategies one of us shared in the past is you come up with a grocery list of those items. Another technique would be using visual imagery. So visualize the information. And this is one that I can't help but do. I'm a visual learner. I make sense of things by seeing it. But creating a description of something or a picture of it so that you understand this goes to this, becomes this. And then if you kind of see that animated in your mind, much easier to recall that later because you now have kind of a flow of that or a picture that you can recall. Obviously, this is probably best for those of us who do lean into visual imagery. Creating these mental images really can help make the information more sticky, as he describes it, and unforgettable. He also then talked about trying to link what's outside from this audiobook to what's inside, learning to link it to something that you already know, this new thing that you're learning. So you might be learning about something that you've read another book about, and you now put this concept or theory side by side with that other one. You put it in the same, hanging file in your brain.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So linking it with knowledge that you already have.
It's a bit like the attaching habits to an existing one.
He then talked about something that, again, would be a little harder if you were riding your bike or doing a home project like you might be doing while you're listening, but using any of the tools that are set up. Some audio apps or things that you might use allow you to create a bookmark.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when we used to go back and highlight, but then importantly, go back and look at what you bookmarked. Do something with that. Really get that information kind of, again, solidified. The other thing that he highlighted is something that I know anyone who's into like more mindfulness would be able to relate to this, and that is using some pauses. Purposely pause as you're listening so that you can reflect and absorb rather than just have more and more information.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Now, I know when I listen to things for what you and I are going to talk about here, I'm pausing constantly, thinking about it, making notes, going back, listening to it again. So definitely I'm using some of these strategies in preparation for what you and I do here.
So it's like almost intentionally creating some pauses to reflect.
He talks about really this pausing is really an important part of helping us to kind of consolidate the information that we're taking in into our long-term memory.
Right.
Just rushing through and getting more and more doesn't allow us that opportunity.
Is that partly, does it tap into your imagination? I vaguely remember something about your imagination is in a different part of the brain to memories. Where you build memories is somewhere in imagination. Is there something to do with that? If you can, I don't know.
I definitely think the
theorizing,
visual imagery and things would be tied to that. But I think even just the pauses gives us time to work it through the short-term memory and move it to the long-term memory. But if we're going quickly, we don't get to, we don't get to move it from file drawer A over to file drawer G. We're just keep adding more to file drawer A and more and more. So using these pauses can be really important.
And I suppose that also potentially combines to the one that you mentioned before about associating it with something else. So the more you're sort of moving things around that filing system, the more you're cementing it a bit more long term somewhere.
Absolutely. The other thing he talks about is if this is a book that you are listening to for content and for future application of this knowledge, he really does recommend listening more than once. And I certainly find this helpful for me. There are certain books that you and I have talked about, books that I talk about a lot in my work at TFM, that I have probably listened to 3 or 4 times. Again, different than holding the book and reading it that many times, but for me, the first time through, I'm doing all of my I never thought of that. Oh, that's good. But I'm not holding it. The second time through, I now have a little, I call it a hanging file for that. And I'm like, oh, wait, I remember this.
Yeah.
What's the detail now about this? And I can go more in depth. And then if it's been a while and I haven't had exposure to it again, I'll listen again. And every time I find I need some more hanging files. I didn't pick up on this part before, or I didn't connect this part to this other data before. So an example for me, a couple of books at TFM, Never Binge Again and Brain Over Binge. And I think one of the Kelly McGonigal stress book, I can't even think of the name of it right now, but I've listened to those numerous times. And yes, I can talk about them in general. Atomic Habits is another one. But it's so helpful for me once a year, once every 6 to 8 months or so, just to go back and listen again, because it really does fill up my files a little more, help me remember more, and piece things together more solidly. So it's not just a bunch of information. I can start to make more sense of it and apply it to things. So definitely the repetition, both for a section, but also the whole podcast, the whole book. I do that a lot in preparation for the topics that you and I talk about. I find a podcast that I'm interested in doing. I listen to it once, and the first time through, I don't take any notes. I just listen. One, I kind of evaluate. Does that have things in it that I want to be able to share? Okay, now I'm going to go back and look at it again and, start creating the notes and pulling the key points. And then sometimes even after that, I will then go look at the transcript to get some of the detailed things, because sometimes if I keep re-listening and trying to type it into my phone or onto my computer, I'm missing what they're saying and I have to rewind like 26 times. So that's when I will turn to the transcript to see it written down and then be able to pull from that. So that helps me as well.
Yeah, I found that useful too. I'm the same. I usually just let the first episode wash over me. The only thing I've started to do with these longer episodes, like the Diary of a CEO podcast that I've liked a lot of late, but they tend to be these, quite often they're over 2 hours. And I have this technique of just taking some screenshots of the timestamps where it's particularly interesting. So I am just sort of letting it wash over me, but I'm just sort of snapping away so that I haven't got to listen to the whole 2.5 hours again. I've sort of just taken some key areas, because apart from anything else, you can't condense a podcast that long. So I quite often have, twice the number of bookmarks that I'm going to end up using. But I'm the same. And I'm the same with those kind of content-rich books like you. You just let the first one sort of wash over you and listen to it as you would. I was thinking about, with you saying that, especially these ones that are really useful to you using with your work at TFM, and that you do a sort of annual refresh. But the other thing, where that point that you made of his, where you're associating it with something else, of course you'll have listened to more content from other authors, but there will also have been things that have come up in the community that are slightly different. So when you listen to it again, you're not only refreshing and picking up different pieces, but you've got these sort of like subconscious cues that suddenly ping in your mind. Oh yeah, that bit that I heard that before, but it wasn't as directly relevant as it is now, because we hadn't had that discussion when I listened to it last time. But this time it's much more relevant because people have been asking that question or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. It reminds me a little bit, as you were saying that, again, I have this file folder image in my mind, and I was thinking about, I like to watch true crime shows, and I was watching one last night, and it was an old case, and they have just drawers and drawers of files of information. But over the years, new pieces of information come in and now make other things more relevant or irrelevant. And I think that happens for me too, like you said, as I keep going back. Certain things that James Clear says stand out even more to me. Or I don't highlight certain things as much because they've lost some of the relevance of more specific ways I'm working with that information. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think the first one that you talked about with repetition, and I always remember that with being taught how to write a really good essay. And it's the same with creating content. And I was thinking of some of the audiobooks that I've listened to, and I seem to remember Brene Brown does a really good job of this, that each chapter she's sort of, and Jim Kwik talks about this. I remember this was a big eye-opener for me with changing how I studied. He always said you should have a look at the exam questions first, because it kind of cues you, have those questions in your mind for when you're looking at the content, because you're looking out for the answers and you're just cueing your brain. But having that introduction that gives you an idea of what's coming up. So you're sort of cueing your brain to listen out for the information. Then you have the content, and then you have a review summary at the end of the key points. And I seem to remember, and I can't actually remember the title of the book, but that one of Brene Brown's where we shared a lot of the chapters. Remember, we did something like 6 episodes on the trot, didn't we, of sharing various chapters from her book. And I seem to remember she does a good job of that. She summarizes at the end of each chapter with some key points. And what I particularly liked about her audiobook was that she'd added extra and specific content for the audiobook specifically. So she would do something like, when there was a particularly interesting point she was making or whatever, she would stop and read it again. So she would stop and say, hey, yeah, that's a really important point. Let me just give you a minute to pause and think about that. And now I'm going to repeat it for you. She'd actually really thought about the different medium she was presenting it in and helping you take in that information. That really stood out to me with that audiobook, and it was very helpful. And yes, she employed a lot of those techniques that he's talking about, and it really did help learn that information. And yes, that whole teaching it thing. I think I'd been reading his Limitless book or something before I did a course and I was learning. So I did actually use a few of these techniques, the speaking it out loud, teaching it, albeit sort of just to myself. But yeah, just all those different processes that you've mentioned here, they really do help cement that information if this was for an exam. And it really made a big difference going into the exam at remembering that information. But also I think especially with that teaching one, thinking about explaining it to somebody else. One, you have to really understand it to be able to explain it to somebody else. But you have to, even if you're just doing it to an imaginary audience, you kind of have to be ready to be asked questions about it and coming from different viewpoints. So you really have to kind of think around it. And that really helps you going into an exam where you might not get the question that you've practiced, but you'll still be having to answer on the same topic, but the question might be coming from a slightly different direction. So if you've really thought around it, you'll still be able to cope with that. I think that teaching one is a really, really good way of cementing information if you need to. And of course, that's what you're doing all the time. I mean, you're sharing valuable information. Effectively, you're teaching it, aren't you? And coming at it from different angles and making it appropriate and relevant to the individual's experience. So you are really having to think around these interesting topics that you're sharing. So you must be practicing all these different strategies all the time.
Yeah, and it's good for me to be reminded some of these things are really helpful and why they're helpful. You also highlighted something really important to me about the teaching part, is that it prevents, I know for me, but I think for most of us, it prevents it from being just rote memorizing or regurgitation. If I read a chapter and just regurgitate it to you, that may not help. I mean, it may be repetition for me, but it may not help me really understand it better. But to have to come up with a way to explain it, and maybe for me, since I love analogies, it might then, if I'm going to teach it to you, it might make me think of some analogies and things. And now, if I want to really kind of hold on to that information, it helps me to have taught it and thought of different ways of explaining it and different examples. So I definitely think that's a strategy that I learned long ago, fortunately, and have used for a long time now. And I think for me, it's really key. Otherwise, I do tend to just let the information slide back out of my head.
And you must always be thinking about it in that way, not necessarily on that first listen, but as you're going back into it, gleaning useful information, you must always kind of have that framework in your mind as you're listening of how useful it would be, how you're going to apply it to the people that you help. So you must already be sort of have that filing system laid out, as it were.
Yeah, it's a little sad for me to admit this, but when, for example, if I have a master class or a workshop that I'm doing at TFM, I think about these things a lot, and not just like come sit down at my computer and think about how will I do this, but when I go to sleep at night, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I'm processing it in my brain. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I hope I remember this in the morning because I think this would really be helpful. But I'm constantly playing over, what are some examples? Oh, what's an analogy for that? And how does that fit with this other material? So yes, I'm often actively engaged in connecting and making sense of it. So remembering it is really important as well.
Yeah, that's the bit that I often struggle. I need the bookmarks and things. You think you're going to remember it, but then a week later it's gone.
Yeah. I love your screenshot thing. I do that sometimes with the transcripts for podcasts. But I think that's a really good way of simplifying the bookmarking idea. Like, I know I want to come back to this, so let me point out to myself where it is. So as you said, next time when I come back, I don't have to listen for the 20 minutes around this. I can, narrow in on this.
Yes, and I found it helpful if you're using something like YouTube, because it has the chapters. So when you quickly go and write down the chapter, that those timestamps where it also groups it into the sort of categories, which triggers your memory. Oh, yes, that's what they were about. And then I can sort of start, especially when it's these really long episodes, you can start weeding out, which are the more important ones that you want to share. So yes, it's just something that I stumbled across, not always having a pen and paper handy to write it down. I just found it quite a good way of sorting things out, because yes, these lengthy podcasts, a 2.5 hour episode, well, if you're gonna make 3 passes at that, you're gonna spend all day.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons I don't tend to talk about those episodes as much anymore, just because of the intensity of time.
Yes, the trouble is that I've happened to listen to so many really interesting ones that I wanted to share. So I've had to sort of find a strategy of, just pulling out the really interesting information. I've just started onto a new one, actually, that is another, I think, 2.5-hour episode. But I've learnt, yes, to take these screenshots as I go. For one, to see if it's going to be one that's going to work as sharing, but not to have to go back and trawl through such a long episode.
Absolutely.
There's so much interesting stuff out there at the moment.
Always.
That's the good thing. Well, again, very useful tips and tricks from Mr. Kwik. We can always rely on him. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. And they're always just, again, they're quick, they're short, but they're powerful. They're like, I could do that. They're very applicable. So always a good one for me to go back to.
Definitely. I've often ended up writing pages and pages of notes from one of his 15-minute episodes. Sometimes they're so rich in content, it can be a bit misleading. Okay, well, until I see you next time, I hope you and everyone at home has a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.